The E-Giant has recently been hurt with a 33% tower damage reduction. However, I still believe that he is very powerful and that people are still struggling against him. Because if people are still using him in top 1k, he is probably still good. So with that being said, in this video I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to take down an E-Giant. Or two. Let's get started. Hey everybody, your host here, David, and today I'm going to go over everything you need to know to take down an Electro Giant. But before we get started, let me go over a brief explanation on how the card works. The E-Giant is a 7 elixir tank with a small radius around him, and whenever a troop hits him in this radius, they will be zapped. So the faster the troop hits, the weaker they are to the Electro Giant. That means that troops that are weak against zap are also weak against Electro Giant. Unless they can outrage him. Projectile troops can do a decent job at taking down an Electro Giant since they can chip away from him at a distance. However, Electro Giant is usually paired up with tornadoes, so this can be ineffective at times. This giant is also very devastating to towers, so if he ever does connect to your tower, do not leave him alone. Place cards to make sure to reduce damage as much as possible. Even if the giant has a little bit of health, it can deal a ton of damage to your tower, so make sure to place troops, or you will take tons of damage. And since Electro Giant only attacks buildings, buildings are useful to pull him away from your tower and potentially take him out. But beware that most E-Giant users do bring spells, so they may be able to counter your building. E-Giant has also been paired with Mirror in recent seasons, which can be pretty effective to overwhelm their opponents. But with that being said, that is a basic rundown on the card, but let's go into more depth on how to counter this beast. There are 3 main ways to take down Electro Giant, which are buildings, heavy hitters, and projectile troops. But let's start with buildings. Buildings are probably the most effective way to take down an Electro Giant since it can force him to pass away from your tower. A good note about the Electro Giant is that his goggles aren't just for show, but give him an incredible sight range, which is best described by Reddit user NovaLightCR. One notable point on the E-Giant is his insane sight range. You can pull him a lot further than any other tank, which makes him extra susceptible to buildings. Basically, if you have a building and they don't have enough to lighting it right away, you pretty much win. E-Giant is mostly played at the bridge nowadays, but if you do have a building and they have little elixir, you can use just about any building to take him out. Remember that the Electro Giant usually has support, so make sure your building is reserved for the Electro Giant and use any other troops to kind of counter their support units. Keep in mind that the Electro Giant can be placed in the back so they can save up elixir to kind of take out your building. So 3 things you can do is either try to bait out their spell, force them to spend elixir, or cycle to a new building. It all works. Even though the Electro Giant does have a larger sight range, I would still recommend the force replacement for buildings since it's pretty reliable as it is. But if you really need to pull him farther, you can do that. So keep that in your pocket in case you ever face against Electro Giant. There are 2 different types of buildings in this game, which are spawners and defense. Spawners do a better job at taking down an Electro Giant in my opinion, since they don't stun themselves when the giant is next to them, which gives your tower plenty of time to chip away from the giant. Defensive buildings also do their fair share, but they may wizard away from the E-Giant's zap. But with that being said, that doesn't mean you shouldn't place defensive buildings. Always place buildings if there's an Electro Giant. Method number 2, we have heavy hitters. Heavy hitters are another great way to take down Electro Giant due to his notable amount of health, along with the way his zap mechanic works. The E-Giant stuns troops every time he receives damage as long as the perpetrator is within his range. So with that being said, the slower and heavier the hit is, the more effective it is against the giant. But keep in mind that not all tank killers are considered heavy hitters. Some examples of heavy hitters are P.E.K.K.A, Mini P.E.K.K.A, Sparky, and the Hunter, and some examples of tank killers that are not heavy hitters are Lumberjack, Night Witch, and I guess Mega Knight. But they won't do it as well of a job as taking them out since they will chip themselves away from the zap. But with that being said, if your only tank killer is something like Lumberjack, that doesn't mean you shouldn't place it. You still need to place it. You're just not going to get as much value when you're trying to take down the Electro Giant. Also, when placing the heavy hitter, make sure to place it in front of the E-Giant so it doesn't accidentally get distracted by his support units. Because if they do get zapped and then something comes closer, they're just going to target it instead. No, we don't want that. We don't want that. Some notable mentions include the Inferno Tower and Inferno Dragon. These troops usually get hard countered by Electro Giant, but if you do place them correctly, they can outrange him long enough to make sure he burns to death. But if the Electro Giant manages to get too close to these units, you can pair them up with freeze to make sure that stuns are ineffective against them. Ranged units are also effective against Electro Giant since his zap radius is so small, so they can be useful to chip away from him at a distance. But you must beware of tornadoes since they can just pull your troops into the giant, and that is not any fun. So if you do have a bad cycle and your ranged troop is your only E-Giant counter, either try to bait out the tornado with a bridge spam troop, or you can place your ranged troop behind the tower so it's more difficult to pull into the E-Giant. However, if you do place your range trip behind your tower, you are going to take some damage from the giant, so beware of that before doing it. Also, if you can combine some of these methods, such as using buildings along with range, or you can use some range troops with tank killers to kind of try to chip away from the E-Giant's health. So now you know how to counter the E-Giant, but what if you can't place down any of those cards? Welcome to the section where we talk about damage reduction. An E-Giant on your tower is absolutely devastating, but here are some ways to reduce the damage. First thing I'm going to go over is pretty obvious. Just place cards. You do not want an E-Giant on your tower alone. This is a recipe for a disaster. So if you can, just try to place cards to reduce damage. It doesn't matter what it is, just make sure the E-Giant does not be alone on your tower. And just look at this example. Just by placing 1 Electro Skeleton, you saved your tower nearly 400 health. And that can really add up in the game. The second thing I'll go over is to try to slow down the Electro Giant's progress. This can be done with many cards such as Ice Wizard, Ram Rider, Earthquake, Poison, and so many more. And basically what we can do is slow down the E-Giant's progress and give your tower more time to chip away from it from a distance. Another way to reduce damage is try to displace the E-Giant. You can do this by either pulling it away with a tornado, pulling it away with a fisherman, or using a log to kind of give your tower a little bit more time to chip away at the E-Giant. The Fisherman's probably the best way to take down an Electro Giant since you can activate your tower and potentially gain your +4 lead. Just remember when using the Tornado or the Log, try to wait as long as possible without the E-Giant getting to your tower so you can potentially maximize the amount of space you can give your tower and the E-Giant. Swarmies also do a great job at taking down the E-Giant's health. However, if you do this, you're going to lose them since they are very squishy and Zap just kills them. Swarmies aren't the best way to take down Electro Giants since they die in the end. But if you need to just take down a little bit more damage, Swarmies do the job. The most notable Swarmy to take down Electro Giant is probably the Barbarians since they're just so tanky. They're just going to take down Electro Giant every time. Another way to slow down the E-Giant is by stunning him. For example, look at these Zappies. They just really slow down his progress. And if you do stun him, that also stuns his ability. So if you do want to preserve your health, if you can time it correctly, you can potentially zap or get some sort of zap troop to kind of slow down how many hits your tower takes from the Electro Giant's zaps. Another thing you can do, and this isn't very well known, is to try to block the E-Giant's passing. You can use big cards such as Giant Skeleton, P.E.K.K.A, or Mega Knight to kind of slow down his passing and make sure that it takes longer for the Electro Giant to make it to your tower. Just look at this example. You can save a little bit of damage if you place your troop in front of the Electro Giant to slow it down. It may not be much, but in the end, it might be what you need to win the game. But that is basically everything you need to know to counter the Electro Giant. But now comes the important question. What if there are 2 of them? Well, I showed you a few different ways to take down one Electro Giant, so use that knowledge to take down the other one. For example, you can use a building to pull them both in and have a range troop take them out slowly. Or you can have a building and a tank killer to kind of work together and take them out. The possibilities are endless, but whatever you do not let the Electro Giant stay on your tower alone, since that is devastating. And another tip about taking down 2 Electro Giants is kind of don't overcommit on 1 Electro Giant, because if you do, you won't have enough to take down the Electro Giant, and then you might potentially lose the game. So don't overcommit if you know that they have Mirrored and Cycle. Thank you guys all so much for watching. If you're new here, consider subscribing, and if you haven't already, leave the video a like. But with that being said, I will see you guys all in the next video of Clash Royale.